Hello and most welcome to Age 1901. This is the first recording since the celebrated Big 1900. Hooray! And we will continue today with John B. Canfield, Private Language, the Diary Case. It singles in on a specific paragraph, and it's the infamous or famous paragraph 258. It is about a private diarist who can name his own inner sensations and somehow accurately contrast them as to have a difference. To tell them apart, to make them dislike, but also be able to see them as the same. There are two things that the private language supposedly can establish: sameness and unlikeness or difference. That's quite a lot. It's not a small wish. It's rather a lot. And of course, these are things we usually do not ponder in any particular fashion or to any specific length. But they are all the same things that makes an enormous difference in the end. It changes everything, depending on what conclusion you come to. The private language is one of those unquestioned riddles or enigmas that dwells underneath everything else. An unspoken assumption, if you like. A sine qua non for everything. I think that's not unusual, that they feel this is fundamental, not something that you can live without. That it is absolutely necessary, and any loss of a private language would evolve in complete chaos. And the private diarist is the possibility of remembering correctly. Last time we looked into different interpretations. Those are very good because they give us a chance to, I think they are absolutely necessary to go into a deeper level of Wittgenstein, to see how former interpreters have taken Wittgenstein, will make our understanding deeper, more encompassing. It is not the reason to criticize him that John B. Canfield brings people like Kenny and Kripke, McKinnon, it is to show the case. They are necessary. They are helping out in a very similar manner, actually, to Francis Wylin. The idea is not to establish a new argument or bring a new opinion into the game or a new sort of philosophy. No, the idea is to deepen the understanding. So all these interpreters are mainly correct, but it's on the very depth level where you can find some discrepancies. And I will continue where I left off last. We have been discussing Kenny and McGinn, Mary McGinn, and also Hans Johann Glock. Hans Johann Glock is pretty close to Joachim Schulte. And now we are on subchapter 5 and 258M. But I impress it on myself can only mean this process brings it about that I remember the connection right in the future. Here, Wittgenstein assumes that the meaning of the diarist's subsequent judgment S is a function of the rule of sign-referent association governing it. The following distinction will help clarify the point. Someone who learns a rule of the kind in question can employ it later, but be mistaken in his judgments. On the other hand, he can misremember the rule and hence not make the judgment he intends to make. We might call the first sort of error a factual mistake, and the second a rule-related one. Rule-related, indeed. For example, someone given an ostensive definition of north might mistakenly identify the path Jones follows and on that basis say falsely that Jones is going north. In the other sort of case, he misremembers what direction was defined as north. Wrongly taking north to be that direction, he says Jones is going north. This is not a straightforward factual mistake, because the speaker is using the word north in an idiosyncratic way. In paragraph 258m, Wittgenstein is concerned with the possibility of a rule-related mistake. Rule-related mistake. His point is that subsequent judgments made in terms of a sign taught by ostensive definition are correct only if the speaker rightly remembers the rule thus established and judges according to it, or in its light. The emphasis in paragraph 258m is not on some supposed causal relationship between the act of impressing and the later judgments. The point is rather that we shall not say the diarist has successfully impressed the connection on himself if he does not in future remember the connection right, and make his judgments in the light of that connection. That the aim of the direct sample is to present a case where someone notes the recurrence of an earlier sensation, the one he defined. Defined. So a necessary condition here, unsuccessful ostensive definition, is that the speaker goes on to remember the connection or the definition right when making subsequent judgments. The job of paragraph 258 is to state that necessary condition. Before proceeding, I shall enter another distinction regarding remembering the connection right. I make the contrast in terms of an example. Next page, please. There are two ways one might solve the Rubik's Cube puzzle. Puzzle. One is to proceed solely by instinct, as it were. To manipulate the cube until each face contains only squares of the same color. Someone able to do this consistently can solve the cube even if he can give no account of how he does it. The second way is to introduce a symbolism for describing changes in the cube. Discover and record appropriate moves and implement a plan of solution in terms of them. We might call the first a solution in action, and the second an articulated solution. Solution. Similarly, there are two distinct ways in which someone might be said to have remembered a rule introduced by ostension. The first shows itself in his actions. In epistemically optimal conditions, he makes judgments that accord with the way others follow the rule. Whether or not he can articulate it, the second way requires in addition that he be able to state the remembered rule. When we speak of the diarist remembering the rule, we might be referring to either type of correct remembering. Remembering. This distinction will be needed when we come to consider criteria. Chapter 6, 258 N. But in the present case, I have no criterion of correctness. A certain jump, Kenny, has shown that we must refrain from making a certain jump in reading the last four sentences of 258. The first of these explicitly concerns remembering the connection between sign and sensation. Right. Right. The jump I am speaking of is the interpretive switch from remembering the connection right to remembering whether a present sensation is indeed S. Given this jump, one reads the last sentences of paragraph 258 as concerned with the question of remembering correctly whether some present sensation is indeed S. And the criterion of correctness Wittgenstein refers to gets taken as a criterion for correctly remembering whether this sensation is S. But the text is clear and clear still in the German. The criterion of correctness Wittgenstein alleges to be missing governs whether one has remember the connection right. It does not govern whether this sensation is S or not. The two things are linked but not identical.
Identical.
Identical. One can make a correct judgment only if one correctly remembers the rule governing that judgment. But remembering the rule correctly does not entail that one makes a correct judgment, or for that, any judgment at all. The same reading applies to the final remarks in paragraph 258. The last part of paragraph 258 O thus should be read: whatever is going to seem right to me as regards the connection established between S and its referent is right. Right. As opposed to whatever is going to seem right to me as regards the truth of S is right. Similarly for paragraph 258p. What would a criterion look like? Look like. The one explicit discussion of criteria in the later philosophy occurs in the Blue Book.
Blue book. Blue book. Blue book. Blue book. Blue moon.
We give criteria in answering in a special way the question, how do you know that so and so is the case?
The case.
In his example, if angina has been defined as the inflammation by a particular bacillus. Bacillus.
Oj, 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 oj.
And if the appropriate "how do you know" question gets the answer, "I have found the bacillus so and so in his blood," then this answer gives us the criterion, or what we may call the defining criterion of angina. Angina. The criterion or criterial rule governing a statement tells us which states of the world make the statement true. I assume that such definitions can be either explicit or implicit, and that the criterial rule holds in circumstances that are usual or normal. The notion of a defining criterion demarcates one pole of a range of cases. Range. With what are clearly mere symptoms at the other pole. This we mentioned so many times. In real life, as Wittgenstein goes on to say, we could in most cases distinguish criteria from symptoms only by making an arbitrary decision ad hoc. In such cases, we might cite certain phenomena as justifying a truth claim, and the justification might be accepted even though it is unclear whether the phenomena constitute defining criteria or mere symptoms. We might use the term ways of telling to refer to such phenomena
Phenomenal.
In what follows, I shall use the term criterion to refer to either defining criteria or to phenomena that fall in the ways of telling category. Criteria, so understood, designate the situations that render statements true.
True.
The truth conditions governing a sentence constitute an essential part of its meaning. We may know its meaning without knowing its truth value. We may be unable, for example, to ascertain whether the state of affairs mentioned in the criterial rule obtains.
Of things.
To understand criteria better,
Better.
we must turn to examples.
Example.
Yeah. One type of case would appeal to a written record of an ostensive definition. Another to a paradigm such as a labeled standard sample. Our main interest, however, must be in two additional sorts of example. The first of which is of the inaction. Variety. Imagine a people who use color words in such contexts as making requests, stating intentions, or giving commands, but who have no vocabulary of rules.
Rules.
A sample sentence would be, bring the red bowl.
Bring the red ball. Alliteration. Bring the red ball.
Bring the blue bowl, even better.
Nice.
Children learn the color words by observing their elders or through training that does not employ higher level words like rule.
Rule.
As part of such teaching, an adult might point to something red. Say the name, encourage the child to respond with red. It is essential here that disagreement in color judgments in epistemically optimal conditions be exceptions. Otherwise, utterances like "bring the red bowl" would not have the sense they have for us. No, no. How could they? An outside observer's criterion for saying that one of these people remembers the rule for red right is that the person's use of red stands in general conformity with the society's practice. If the person requests a red bowl and one that color is brought, he is content, and so on. We can get an example on the articulate side of my earlier distinction by introducing talk of remembering rules. Instead of saying, "this is red," in teaching a child, an adult might say, "the rule is, this is red." He knows the rule would be taught in cases where the person in question moves among the tribe members, making and responding to judgments, requests, and so on. In a way that conforms to the tribe's practice. Instead of "he knows the rule," they might have the expression "he remembers the rule right." Judgments about whether someone remembers the rule right could answer to two different criteria. Does the person cite the right rule? Or do his uses of red conform with the community's use? The second criterion is basic. It would overrule the first.
First.
So the criterion for remembering correctly concerns behavior. Behavior. Someone's making of judgments, fetching objects, stating intentions, and then acting accordingly in the context of a practice. This claim echoes the first sentence of PI, paragraph 202, and foreshadows its conclusions. And hence also obeying a rule is a practice. Hence, it is not possible to obey a rule privately. Otherwise, thinking one was obeying a rule would be the same thing as obeying it. The need for a practice will become more evident if we consider a version of Wittgenstein's example of +2. Imagine a people for whom the use of red and other color terms goes through a 4-day cycle. Words for red, yellow, green, and blue change each day in a fixed progression. What by our way of speaking was called red one day is called yellow on day 2. Green on day 3. Blue on day 4. And red again when the cycle comes round to day 1, and so on. The intermediary color terms are correspondingly cycled. To children raised in this culture, it is natural to use the terms in that way. The example may be more acceptable if we suppose that other items are similarly cycled. For example, lodging, social status, job, all change according to what day of 4 it is. Now, if we ask on day 2 of the cycle whether one of these people remember the rule for read right, we get a positive answer, provided he uses it in a way that others do, as applying to what we would call yellow. The way these people go on or continue in the use of the color terms, their practice determines their criterion for remembering the rules right. Desert islanders briefly considered. Wittgenstein wants to deny the diarist criterion, but what about the case of a lifelong Robinson Crusoe? Wittgenstein remarks. We can indeed imagine a Robinson Crusoe using a language for himself, but then he must behave in a certain way. Or we shouldn't say that he plays language games with himself. The Crusoe is borderline case of language use or rule following. If you choose to say that such a person has language, our criterion will have reference to consistent behavior of a certain kind. For example, suppose his counting judgments are not consistent. Behavior of a certain, not consistent. He records 3 bags of grain, sometimes as 3 and sometimes as 5 staples, or again as 1 staple, and so on. If so, we would not say he remembers correctly the rule we thought we saw him introduce. On the other hand, we might say, given that his counting behavior is consistent, Crusoe himself might deploy a criterion to see whether he remembers the rule for 3 staples. By investigating whether a given remark accords with those entered in the past. Such checking up, presupposes the existence of a steady pattern of behavior, a one-man practice. Similarly, observation might lead us to say that Crusoe employs a sign for red, and we can even imagine discovering he employs color signs in the four-cycle way. And I think we end there. I think we had enough complexities. Let's see, we are on page 387.
Four cycle way. Four cycle way.
Very good. The last thing here gives a very good clue. Robinson Crusoe counting something and making lines like lines like this for each thing he counts, so to speak. If he doesn't do that consistently, there is no rule established. Remember Barbara Tversky showing us that thinking is an action. It's the deliberate cutting off of the horde from the hunters, for instance, to make an isolate, taken out of context, and then somewhere else reintroduce the thing. It's done by the hands or the act. And it's so obvious in this case that counting is an act. But you have one thing, you have two things, you have three things, and you compare it to the rods or the stakes. One goes with one, two with two. It's not done inside here. It's not exclusively outside either. Actually, it doesn't make any sense to speak of inside, outside here. It's a doing. In this primitive counting game, one understands clearly it's a doing at the bottom. We know it's not only Barbara Tversky today. We know all acts of thinking are acts, doings of the hand, the whole body. And especially from good old George Lakoff Johnson show that all abstract thinking is bodily. It's even more bodily than the repetitive lower thinking, if you like. The rule can be watched. It has a purpose. It wouldn't make any sense to say it's inside of your head. It doesn't fit reality. It doesn't fit a counting experience. You do something. How could you count without doing anything? Well, maybe once upon a time when you learned it by heart, you forget that you actually do something. This is what Barbara Tversky showed in her experiments. When people are alone, when they do the most abstract, the whole body comes into motion. In order to understand, it needs to be embodied. So that as a starting point, going in the wrong way, we go back for a quote here. And on page 384. The two ways of solving the Rubik's Cube puzzle. It's the third line here. One is to proceed solely by instinct, as it were, to manipulate the cube until each face contains only squares of the same color. Someone able to do this consistently can solve the cube, even if he can give no account of how he does it. But listen now, the second way is to introduce a symbolism for describing changes in the cube. Discover and record appropriate moves and implement a plan of solution in terms of them. So you can use the lines I showed you earlier as symbols, and you can sort of make a plan for how to move the Rubik's Cube. Remember this one? I should have one here. I loved it when I was younger. And you use the strokes or the symbols to help you solve the puzzle, to get all the colors in one side, or all the different colors in separate sides. This is what thinking is, using symbols, or whatever you call them. Symbols maybe is not the best term because we've been using it in other contexts, but you can call them strokes or hand movements. They do no longer have to be explicit. A chess player doesn't move his hands unless when he moves the pieces on the chessboard. Chess is another good example. You give symbolism to them and you sort of make a plan for how to move them, and in the end you will do that gallantly. But remember, at the bottom, the very bottom, there is a movement. And we know today thinking is done in the motor cortex. That is the active part of the brain, connected to muscular tissue and nerves. So we are deeply ingrained into our doing, and to speak of a thing, like whatever that might be, a fork, and say it's only a fork, doesn't make any sense. It's something you eat with. Otherwise, you wouldn't understand it. An extraterrestrial wouldn't be able to understand that this is a fork. Wouldn't be able to see it as an object. It's actually quite a bit similar to chirality. It takes it even a step further. So things are what we do. Isn't that odd of a conclusion? And we all can agree on it more or less, because this is how they come to doing. And it seemed to be either using the exo-endo connection, inside, outside, outside, inside, ignoring it, you can say, from some perspective. I prefer to use it, that the exo-endo is used constantly. My intention to use something gives it meaning, becomes abstract. So things, as Barbara Tversky and especially Lakoff show, are both extremely practical and extremely abstract at the very same time. Just like a game of chess. and ignoring one side and saying it's purely abstract, then you will lose both sides. You will neither have the practical nor the abstract. So that is the establishment of a rule. Something that is done, it becomes habituated, and it sort of becomes forgotten where the meaning of the words stem from. And we can dwell into mistakes, we can improve our language, or we can go into the mistaken zone and use our language dry, using concepts that has lost their meanings. So as language becomes non-referring, so you can see on page 386, and this is why you cannot have a private diarist. It's the second paragraph. So the criterion for remembering correctly concerns behavior. Yeah. Someone's making up judgments, fetching objects, as I did, stating intentions, which I do with my whole body, and then acting accordingly in the context of practice. This claim echoes the first sentence of PI, paragraph 202, and foreshadows its conclusions. And hence also obeying a rule is a practice. Hence, it is not possible to obey a rule privately. You simply don't do anything. You do not do anything. Otherwise, thinking one was obeying a rule would be the same thing as obeying it. And I think, well, Kalle, come in here, and I think we give you a possibility to join.
Thank you very much. On the same page, 386. So we have the example with the 4-day cycle. And I asked myself, do we have an example of something similar in real life? We do, for instance. Let's take week as an example. We have decided that every 7th day a Monday is a Monday. A Tuesday is a Tuesday every 7th day. So we do have it in real life. So it's not so abstract as it seems. But it's referring to something real, so to say. And it's something that is established by the community of the people. There's nothing, so to say, private about this. During the French Revolution, we know the French changed the days, so they abandoned the 7-day week for a 10-day week. But that was also a common accord. Everybody did it in France and that way. So it's possible. So it's but about the Robinson Crusoe example. As to quote Wittgenstein there, he must behave in a certain way. That is his criteria, so to say, the behavior. And I do like, I think this is not intentional, but I do like this phrase. Cruise as a borderline case of language use of rule following. The word border. So it's a border because he's on an island.
Like, also, I thought about that as well.
We can think about the Norwegian coastline where everything changes. The borders are never fixed. And let's say, but we have to remember that Robinson Crusoe actually he wasn't born on an island.
No.
He was born in civilizations. He knew already what.
Exactly, and those were probably habituated and disappeared from the public view.
He could, so to say, sometimes perhaps recall, write 3 bags of grain with, say, 4. The 4 could stand, say, in his case, it's almost 4 bags, or 3 bags which are very, very full of grain. Or something, or some people like French, I think they have inclusive counting, like staircases. Some people begin with they have inclusive counting with the staircases, like they began with the our first would be the second, I suppose. So it would be something like that, but it should be based on a common accord to make sense. Or he can misremember, of course. If he would become so dement that he doesn't anymore remember what is 3 and 3.
No, exactly. But there is also mentioning, which is interesting. I think in what you said here, he came to the island, had some habituated things already. But in this case, it's a lifelong Robinson Crusoe. He's not an action figure.
Yes, but that is, I think it's not Wittgenstein who's saying that. That is a little bit ambiguous. It's not clear if it's Wittgenstein who says he's lifelong, or is it Canfield?
It's a sort of lifelong. I think both are very interesting, though. So they both prove some interesting points. And as you said, if cruising the actual story, yeah, of course, he brought some habituated things into the island. But a lifelong Robinson Crusoe, maybe he developed some things as well. Could well happen. But those would be, I imagine, that would be pretty obvious still after some age. I've seen people in some cultures, when they count, they use their fingers still. And some people reading, they still move their mouth, as I did when I was younger, learning to read. I moved my mouth. I think it usually takes 2 to 3 years for it to disappear when you're young. You train constant, you iterate, as we say. Man, or something like that. And your mouth learns it for you. You do it slowly, and you understand it. Where there are some people today who maybe skip a part in the process, which is very, unfortunately, very common today, and do not do the sounding correctly or whatever you like, don't follow the rule, and they develop dyslexia. So it can go wrong as well, which is also sort of telling for its. For instance, I never learned to play the football. Somebody could tell me the rules for football, but the actual movements, they never accorded with me.
But why is this significant for our listeners? The Robinson Crusoe example, why should they care how he records the 3 bags of grain? Why is it relevant? Who cares? So why is this point important for our listeners, do you think? Yes, if you have an answer now, why should they care, our listeners, how Robinson Crusoe records 3 bags of grain?
It's like, it's a bit showing it starts with some sort of movement. Often people think when counting sheep, you had a bag of stones. If they had a bag, I don't know. But maybe they had a pile of stone. And for each time a sheep passed, they took out a stone and compared it to the sheep. So for every stone a sheep passed, for the second stone a second sheep passed. It's very likely this is how we learn to count beyond 3. Because there are languages, quite a lot of them, thousands of them, that doesn't have any counting number higher than 3. You seem to be in need of cattle or something like that. So it starts with a doing. you need to do the counting. And of course, the sons of these people, maybe they don't have to use the stones, or maybe they use the stones and it slowly disappears through generations.
Mm.
It goes to show everything is based in praxis.
Mm.
Practice, 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 iteration.
What was the name of the lady again? Barbara
Barbara Tversky, who you were in contact, I remember.
Yes, indeed. Barbara Tversky, yes. So now I got an idea, so to say. So since we are now speaking about a lifelong Robinson Crusoe, it changes. Let's suppose he was actually born on an island.
Mm.
In this case, we could say this is actually an allegory about the primordial man. In Barbara Tversky's sense, that is, now Wittgenstein thinks that he is put into question, how did the first man learn to count? So this is an allegory, we could say, about how we learn to count or think. And Wittgenstein's answer is about behavior. So logically, okay, it makes sense that it became counting and that you put on like these straight lines.
Yes.
For and then it also makes sense that you can sometimes leave this rule a bit, like it's a little bit fluid. It could be some way, because as I mentioned earlier, the bags of grain, one day they are not completely full.
No.
Then you could perhaps say only 0.2, even though it's formally 3 bags. So it could be like a fluid tree. So what okay, perhaps it's complicated thing.
You have a point there, because it starts with this very simple thing, and for each generation and for each hour of iteration, it becomes more and more complex. And what happens today? Well, you learn beyond that, and somewhere you forget that it's praxis in the bottom. That's why Barbara Tversky was so important for us. She showed us, together with Lakoff Johnson and some other neuroscientists / philosophers, that's action is in the bottom, as I said, and still is. We can imagine that the motor action in a very skilled mathematician is quite advanced. My guess, anyway. And it's interesting also that objects are a sort of movement. Because if I grow up with a fork, I might not notice that. This is why the Wittgenstein point is so important. I might start to think these are things that are disconnected to me. Well, as we remember, that's the point of Heidegger with Vorhanden and Zuhanden. And we sort of forget that they are Zuhanden for us. When we eat with them, or pinch with them, or you can do other stuff like taking a nice steak.
And okay, yes, and I think we have to take the word borderline and perhaps qualify its Crusoe as a fluid borderline. So I think that's also
most definitely.
Quite literally, since he's on island.
Yeah, it's a literal borderline, and it's also like praxis borderline, because in this specific unnormal case, of course, he wouldn't develop a language, he wouldn't be the same person, but let's imagine he could be. So it also is like a sort of borderline language game.
And in his case, private language is absolutely necessary. And it will probably be his only language game at all.
Yeah.
Since he will not perhaps meet anybody else, except perhaps, what is the name of the bird? The parrots.
Oh, he got a friend, a parrot friend.
I didn't have a parrot friend.
I think it might. And Friday came,
Friday.
another islander
The
with whom he made friends. Friday came from another island of some sort. I don't remember the whole story. Apparently it's based on a true story that inspired Crusoe. And the island where that person, that sailor, was stranded was incredibly isolated. He just jumped out of the coast of Chile, I think, somewhere. Poor guy, I thought.
So I think the lesson for us is, so it's not necessarily that private language is something bad. Sometimes it's even necessary.
Oh, yeah.
But the lesson is that we have to make it a behavior, physical behavior.
Well, then, yeah, if it's something.
Consistent, more or less.
Yeah. I think the mistake I made before entering into Wittgenstein was thinking that could be a private language without behavior. I just did it inside of myself somehow. And you need to do something. It needs to be done. And then, of course, you can forget that you used to do something, like in the case of the Rubik's Cube, Rubik's Puzzle.
I propose now that we could check out a funny picture with Robinson Crusoe. That will help us to end this in a happy note.
It was made with Daniel Defoe, yeah.
These are the boards for children that quality. And let me see if you find something Robinson Crusoe there. Like a chalice. I don't know. This is so funny. And there is even a Disney version. This is rather funny. I will use those for children. He's rather fun.
Oh, it's good, the pig and the porcupine. I don't remember any porcupine. I'm not sure even that is a pig. It's a tapir or something. I don't know. Yeah, I'll send there.
Okay, let's end there. Thank you.
Thank you very much for participating. Thank you for your comments, Kalle Lundahl. Thank you everyone for listening in. Have a very pleasant morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. Bye bye for now.
Thank you.